Good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Patrick Flynn, and welcome to this morning's A Different Perspective. I am so excited you're here with me on this beautiful January 11th, 2020. Excited to continue our series on sugar. This is going to be a part 2. And I'm going to recap some things from last week a little bit that way, because as you guys know the story from I was showing you guys as we started the series last week, I didn't intend it to be a series. I didn't intend it to actually go more than actually one show to introduce our No Sugar January. But because of the complexity of the questions and what everybody wanted to know, I decided to break it into 3 parts. So last week, if you haven't watched it, I will actually continue a little bit of recap today. But the cool thing about the recap, when we go through sugar part 2, I'm going to take part 1 and kind of disprove it a little bit today. Now you say, well, Doc, what are you talking about? Well, we're going to get into some exciting stuff today. And then I'm going to give you a little bit more of some worksheets. Now, if you do want the worksheets more in a PDF form, we're going to have them, and you can Facebook us or message us or email us to have them sent to you, because these are going to be just simple charts that you can use to know kind of in general what a good thing to eat is when it comes to sugar. It's like when we did the No Sugar January. A lot of people have like questions that, Doc, why this and not this? Well, today it's going to be a little bit more evident because of what I go through and more of the what's really actually in certain foods. And then next week what we're going to do, we're going to hit sweeteners intensely and kind of give people some things that we can do. But some of the things that I'm going to cover today are literally going to blow your mind because I'm going to cover everything from why people understand the glycemic index or maybe the insulin index, and why if you try to categorize things that simply, it doesn't work. Now, so having that being said, let's recap a little bit what sugar is in general and why we need to talk about it and kind of recap last week. And then the cool thing is this, then we're going to show you some of a different perspective on it, and then we're going to lead you to some action steps. So today is actually some good action steps. So let's say you're not doing No Sugar January. Let's say that this is your first time you ever watched this. I'm hoping that even if you've never watched any video of mine, that this is going to give you some clear perspective on some direction and action steps you can take. So let's start here. As I said before, sugar is a general term like estrogen. As I recap on that, some things that really appealed to women when I started teaching this a long time ago, and it even happened yesterday with a wonderful lady that I was sitting with because she was actually getting very bad clinical advice from an integrative doctor where they were trying to give her estrogen levels, and she's in her early 50s. They were trying to give her, estrogen levels of that of a young lady, of a cyclic woman. Well, that makes no sense considering the fact that there's more than just one estrogen. And they're trying to raise certain levels, but that's a bad idea. Now, once again, but that shows that estrogen is just a term that represents a significant amount of hormones. Estrogen is a general term. Well, so is sugar. That's why there's confusion. The reason why there is confusion when it comes to sugar, people will say this, just like they say with estrogens. They'll say estrogens are bad because they can cause cancer. And statistically, they can show that high levels of certain estrogens can actually cause the metastasis of breast tissue, and it can lead to breast cancer. But there's other estrogens that are very protective. There's other estrogens that are extremely good for you. And here's what happens. And there's no such thing as a bad estrogen. If the estrogen that does create, that can lead, it could lead to cancer, it's only in a bad state is if it's elevated. Well, guess what happens? That's so related to sugar. Because once again, sugar is a general term like estrogen. People say, sugar's bad. And I'll be like, what sugar? And on top of it, they'll say, sucrose is bad. Well, I'm going to explain what that is if you haven't watched before. I'm like, really? Because sucrose itself is actually needed for life. But once again, if sucrose gets at a high level, if you consume too much, just like that estrogen levels get too high, certain ones of them, you can metastasize something bad. If too much sucrose gets into your system, there can be a response that could be bad. So once again, what I want you guys to get the concept of, sugar is definitely a general term. But how is it defined in all the literature? this is the thing. Because this is how they make dietary recommendations, is based on this. Oh, we have a problem? Hold on. We got a little static. We're going to switch over our wonderful media team. This is Jason. What's up there?
What are we doing?
There we go.
All right, let's switch one out.
Let's just change this out real quick.
Sorry.
That's okay.
There we go.
I'll button that up then. Oh, way better. Way better? Yeah. Jason's kind of making me show more chest hair here. Got to button that up a little bit.
Get you an even bigger female audience.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, media team, because you guys are absolutely unbelievable. You're always making all these things perfect. And let me say that again. You can never do anything great without other people. And that's the coolest thing about it. We got a great media team and what they do. So thank you, Jason. Thank you, Brandon, for always watching all these things and making everything perfect for our wonderful audience. So that being said, but let's do just a check. Are we good? Are we good on this one?
Yeah, we're good.
We're good. Perfect. So, okay. So as I'm going through this, just understand, let's define it in the way they define sugar just in general, because this is where I believe some of the confusing things come from, because this is how they make most of the dietary recommendations. Okay, sugar is a generic term. We know that. Describes any of the classes of soluble crystalline, typically sweet-tasting carbohydrates obtained from plant sources and living organisms. All right, great. That kind of sounds kind of familiar. Sugar is known as a carbohydrate, and that's why they'll say there's bad ones and there's good ones. Well, here's what happens. So let's break them down and get to a little bit more understanding of it. Here we go. They're simple sugars, also called monosaccharides. We covered this last week. Glucose, fructose, and galactose. We're going to a little more in detail in them to understand the aspects of food. But just in general, it's the smallest molecule. You cannot break any sugar molecule, any carbohydrate down more than simple sugars or mono, one saccharide. So glucose is one, fructose is one, galactose. That's why they're individual saccharides. See, the term saccharide actually blankets all carbohydrates. Let me say it again. The term saccharide blankets all carbohydrates. Now there's mono, which is the smallest one. So this is what your body needs. This is what your body uses. So let me say again, this is what your body uses. So that's why when people say glucose is bad, I'm like going, how can you say glucose is bad? Or you can say fructose is bad or galactose is bad. Oh.
Just going to tuck you in a little bit. Just a little.
He's going to change it around a little bit.
Little wire thing there. So make sure. I want you to look as good as possible.
Oh, thank you, sir. There we go. Boy, these guys, that's how detailed they are. One little fraction, they cannot handle it. I love the detail that they have. They're absolutely amazing. Thank you once again, you guys. You guys rock. You're amazing. So when people will classify and say sugar's bad or you don't need sugar, well, guess what? If you understand sugar itself, glucose is the main fuel source for every tissue in the body, including other living organisms, including plants. So just like we said, for example, let's go back. Estrogens. There's bad estrogens, there's good estrogens. No, there's not. There's just estrogens, and they have to be at certain levels, because if this estrogen gets elevated, the rate of breast cancer goes up. I agree. If glucose gets elevated, you're right. Diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and developing type 1, fatty liver, yes. But it doesn't demonize glucose in general, because it's essential. You need it. You can't exist without it. And you're going to find out some of the fallacies what people are teaching when it comes to other things like ketosis and like other diets, that when they demonize sugar itself, you're missing the boat. It's misleading when it comes to dietary choices. So now, here we go. As those sugars combine, because once again, as they combine, they're called disaccharides. So you take those little chunks and you start to combine them, and they create things within nature. Let me say it again. They create things within nature. It's a combination of all those. That's if you look at like a tissue. Even if you take a tissue cell, it has carbohydrates. It has saccharides. Okay? Now a tissue also has proteins and also has fats. And that's the combination that creates microorganisms. Now, disaccharides, compound sugars, are molecules composed of two of them, and they're held together by a bond. That's really important to understand. So therefore, you take some of these monosaccharides, the simple sugars, you combine them, and there's a bond. Now, what you're going to find out going forward, I'm going to give you a little idea to get in your head. What people sometimes dictate of good and bad isn't based on, it's actually ingredients, isn't based on what's actually in it. It's based on how easily those bonds separate and give you available glucose. What do I mean? Well, what you're going to find out in just a second here, a vegetable is a carbohydrate, which is nothing more than just a bunch of monosaccharide sugars. But guess what? A green, those bonds are different, and they don't break down as easy compared to like sugarcane. But guess what? With the exceptions of some, vitamins and minerals and some different, constituents and phytochemicals, biochemically there's not much different. They're all based on sugars. See, and that's the confusion. Now, here we go. Sucrose is a combination of glucose and fructose. Lactose, galactose and glucose. Maltose, glucose and glucose. See, once again, as I kind of gave you the bigger concept last week, this makes more sense now. Because why? Because it's a combination of those. And you can see if you look at those biochemically, guess what? Sucrose. So this is table sugar. This is cane sugar. This is the molecule that makes. It's a molecule, one monosaccharide of fructose and one glucose. Cool. So that's why table sugar. Now if you say, well, doc, that's why sugar cane's sweet. Because why? Like I talked about, a crystalline thing that actually, breaks down and it's soluble, and guess what happens? Guess what? Receptors in your tongue, receptors in your mouth enjoy it because those little monosaccharides have nice little receptors in our mouth. That's why we have taste from them. That's why certain carbohydrates have a lot of taste. Now, if you then look as you go from the monosaccharide, which is one sugar, and you go disaccharide, which is two sugars, and you start going up above two, they give them different names. Oligosaccharides, it's composed between 3 and 10. So how they define them is actually by the length of the chain of sugars. So if you have one monosaccharide, or one it's mono, but you have, let's say, 8, it's called oligosaccharide. And there's organisms that actually have them, once again, all the way through the world, from living to non-living organisms. Now, but here's the big thing. Polysaccharides contain more than 10. They can have anywhere from 200 to 2,500 to thousands. It's just a bunch of glucose molecules all put together. Think about that. So polysaccharides are just nothing more than long chains or bent chains, and what they do, and the more bend they get and the longer they get, guess what happens? It's actually sometimes a little harder to break the bonds. Think about that. Now, here's one thing. So that's why they start to become starch. They start to become cellulose. They start to become, guess what? Glycogen. What are those things? Those are just, once again, longer sugars. They're poly. They have a bunch of them. For example, let me give you an example of this, of cellulose. Cotton. Do you know, for example, if you do this, if you eat cotton, it's hard to break those cellulose bonds, so therefore you poop cotton. Let me give you another one. Corn. If you are a Wisconsin native, one thing that gets very popular in the summer is corn on the cob. All right? And those are, once again, long chain polysaccharides, long chain sugars that, once again, do not break down very easy. The bonds are tightly held. So therefore, when you eat corn on the cob and take a poop, what do you get? Corn off the cob. Your body doesn't break it down. See, so therefore, why? Because those bonds are tightly held together. Now, a starch, even though it's polysaccharide, let's say like a potato, is a polysaccharide, but the glucose, the sugar, is more readily available than actual corn. Now, doc, but they're both carbohydrates. Yes, they are. See, that's why the confusing aspect is not the actually ingredients. Because once again, what's really the difference between here and here? Not much. just the connection of the bonds that are there. And what it does now is this. They connect directly together. They connect together, and now they don't separate apart. So therefore, guess what happens? They're less available. So therefore, they'll say, once again, that these things don't affect your blood sugar as much. So now, but here's the funny part. This is the part that just blew my mind away. And I touched on it a little bit. But I want you to think about this. They don't classify these as sugars, and no one knows why. So isn't that funny? If you're a monosaccharide and if you're a disaccharide, so if you're a simple sugar or if you're a compound sugar, they call them sugars. But the minute that you have more than 2 glucose or fructose or galactose molecules, they actually don't call them sugars. They don't. They actually just say they're carbohydrates. Now think about that. And I tried to significantly find out why. And let me give you my opinion, because nobody can give me an answer. No one can give me an answer. But then it's interesting, guys. Do you understand that every time I teach you guys something, I'm very clear in defined terms? Because then when people misuse terms, I'm very excited when people actually go, hey doc, I didn't really understand what that meant. Well, let's go back to this. This is where all the confusion, hold the phone. This is where all the confusion is coming from. It's actually in its definition. Because here's what happens. They define sugars because it's a general term. They define sugars as a general term, and guess what? It's a generic term that describes class of soluble. Well, here's what happens. If I actually take, cane sugar, beet sugar, and I put it in a glass of water, it's soluble. But here's what happens. If I actually take a piece of broccoli and I put it in a glass of water, how soluble is it? There's some bonds that water will not break down. And you're going to find out this. Do you know what's really the difference, nutritional value, between processed white sugar and organic cane sugar really is? Not much. Not much at all. It's actually very nutritionally the same. Yes, there's more pesticides and herbicides and fungicides and stuff like that. But guess what happens? When you process it, you make the glucose more readily available. See, so that's why processing things makes it much more soluble. So the glucose that hits our bloodstream and spikes our blood sugar is dramatic. So if you had raw organic cane sugar compared to white processed sugar, the only real difference is its available glucose and toxicity. That's it. Oh, doc, white sugar is bad for us and organic cane sugar is good for us. Well, it's still glucose molecules. It's just how fast can they actually cleave off, and is it loaded with a bunch of toxicity? See, that's why when people say sugar's bad and these are bad, well, guess what? The broccoli stalk, guess what? Is a sugar. It's a carbohydrate. But they don't call them sugars. They say they're more compound carbohydrates, which is just a play on words, because watch this. Soluble, crystalline, typically sweet tasting. Now, why is it that oligosaccharides and polysaccharides don't really have that much of a sweet taste? It's simple. Because the receptors that give us the sweet taste can only bind to either a monosaccharide or a disaccharide. Think about that. I want you to think about that. The only thing that they can bind to is mono or disaccharides. That's why a lot of people, when their glucose levels drop, they automatically crave something sugar. They don't crave a salad, even though salad can give you glucose. Even though broccoli can give you glucose, it will just be at a reduced amount of delivery. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense to you. Because when they actually tell me that there's a great difference between sugarcane and broccoli, there's not much difference. Yes, there's nutrients that may be different, but if you actually get down to the microscopic level, it's just a bunch of glucose molecules tightly bound together or loosely bound together. And yes, some minerals and vitamins and phytochemicals. I get it. But there's no difference. It's all sugar. So what they do, they basically change the definition of a sugar based on its size. And that's why in the dietetics world today, they're still so confused. And then you have people say that there's good carbohydrates and bad carbohydrates. That makes no sense. All carbohydrates are saccharides. It doesn't matter if it's a mono up to a poly. You can have one that's a chain of 3,000, or you can have a chain that's 2, and guess what happens? It's still a sugar. So when people say to you, sugar is bad, they don't understand, actually, not only life in general, they don't understand sugar. And that's when I said, oh my goodness, I started having the light bulb moments on how to apply this clinically. And I'm going to share some of those things that I believe that if you do nothing and just understand sugar. So let's say, so a lot of people say, Doc, I'm new at this. I don't have any finances to be able to even get a food test or even buy an herb or do stuff like this. If you get this concept of sugar down, if you actually go back and watch the first video and then this video, guess what happens? This can actually change the course of your life because sugars are so essential for life. And what's led to people to not understand this and why type 2 diabetes is so skyrocket high is because the misunderstanding of it that way. And the more that you actually understand sugar at this level, you're going to make good choices. And the choices you make will lead to better health. So as I had those life bulb moments, I'm like, something we talked last week about one of the first keys to all of this is not sugar metabolism. See, everybody's like this. Everybody goes right to the, let's say, steps down the road. As you guys know, I always talk about pathways, especially biochemical and physiological pathways. And what do I mean by that? A chemical reaction is like this. If I have chemical A and I want to convert it to chemical D, it has to go from A to B, B to C, and C to D. And if there's any pathway that's actually disrupted, you can't get to D. And you might be stuck on A. So that's why I want you to think about that. A lot of people ask about sugar metabolism. Well, sugar metabolism is already a factor done by your liver and also your thyroid. But there's so many factors, that's like factor C. You're forgetting A and B. So I want you to think about it. When you look at this, sugar absorption is very key. And I hit that in detail in some great clinical examples why you need to really slow down your sugar absorption. You really do. Okay, now think about this. There's some people that go into a hypoglycemic coma, that their sugar drops so dramatically that if they don't bypass their sugar absorption and get an IV, they could literally die. See, but then on the flip side, there's people that go into a hyperglycemic coma. If they put an IV and bypass the absorption processes of the body of sugar and put an IV in, they would die because it went too high. See, your brain works the best off of glucose, not ketones. That's why I do not understand it. I do not understand where they get this. So, but I believe that they do it because the rest of the body is so bombarded with glucose and how fast it's absorbing and how fast it's metabolizing that the brain really actually becomes depleted in glucose. So when it gets ketones and things like that, it does wonderful. It's actually very clear. You understand? And as you start to remove and actually start to decrease your absorption of sugars, the slow drip of glucose going to your bloodstream is much more, beneficial than massive spikes of going up and down or actually too high of spikes all the time. See, as I covered last week, there's only roughly about a teaspoon of sugar in your bloodstream at any time. But the average American, now once again, the Americans actually statistically eat more sugar than any other culture across the world, and they're getting anywhere from 18 to 25 teaspoons a day. Now, you don't even want to know what a soda has in it, but that's why, once again, that's why they've moved sodas and talk about diet sodas and high fructose corn syrup. But I'm going to get into today so you understand that that's not a good route either. Okay? So this is one of the first keys, but there's a second key to all this. And I actually just alluded to it. It's actually glucose availability. So once again, sugar availability, the monosaccharide availability. Meaning the smallest component is its availability. Because as absorption into the body actually can be a very big factor of your sugar levels, so can it as a food substance. So if we can look at the availability of what food has, guess what happens? It can dictate a lot. So what I do, I'm always watching. I'm always watching what everybody's doing. I'm always watching what practitioners are put out there. I'm always watching what nutritionists are putting out there. I'm always reading and watching. See, I've always told people, this is just a personal opinion. I tell people are like, Doc, are you excited that the Packers are playing the Seahawks? Not really. I'm not. Do you understand? Because why? While everybody else is watching 3 hours of the Packer game, I'm going to consistently study so I can bring you guys the best information. Because the Packers win or lose don't really make a difference in my life. So I tell people, consistently putting good things into your brain and then sharing them can change the direction of people's life. So I saw this thing recently, and believe it or not, the graphic that I see here, I get what they're trying to do. I read their article, and then I saw their graphic, and they don't really know it, but it's actually really physiologically wrong and actually misleading. Like, you see good carbs versus bad carbs. Well, you know what's really funny? This is a bad example. Do you know why? Because that apple and that donut are very similar. Actually, the amount of glucose availability, that apple, man, guess what happens? The amount of sugar, the amount of glucose available because of an apple is dramatically high. You'll find out when I go through a fruit list, it's not a fruit you want to just eat, especially by itself. If you don't eat an apple with some form of protein or fat, you're going to spike your blood sugars at a dramatic level, which is going to affect your liver and affect every tissue in the body. See, if you think about it, so when they put this donut up there, I'm going, you know, your body can't tell much different on there. Well, Doc, well, wait, this is a processed. Okay, so you can maybe get in a little faster, but the available glucose there is actually very high. Now, if they would have maybe put like an avocado there or something, once again, in a thing, that could have been a little bit different. But this is the fallacy. Because people say, Doc, I got rid of my jelly donut in the morning. I stopped going to Krispy Kreme. I stopped going to Dunkin' Donuts. And I got an apple. And it's even organic. But I have no idea why I'm losing weight and why my triglycerides are still so high. That's the fallacy. Because this apple, eaten, probably is not going to get you to lose any weight. It's probably not going to help you reduce the glycogen, the polysaccharides in your liver. It's probably not going to actually help you reduce your blood sugar. So you're still going to be in a diabetic state regardless if you eat this or that. But let's look at some of the other fallacies that are on this chart. So let's go through it. Once again, low calories, high calories. That's not true. That's not true at all. Do you know why? Some of your good carbs, and let me explain this. You're going to see, for example, they're trying to equate this to like vegetables, and they're trying to equate this to like sweets. That's all they're doing. And what they really should say is available carbs and maybe not available carbs. That's all it is. They're not good or bad. Because here's what happens. If you're in a hypoglycemic state, give me that darn apple. Give me that apple. Here, let me give you an example. If a diabetic that can't regulate the blood sugars, especially like a type 1 diabetic, if their glucose drops and you eat a salad, they're probably going to go into a hypoglycemic coma and die. You say, well, Doc, why? Because the availability of glucose is so hard to draw and break down at a high rate that their blood sugars aren't going to spike up enough to actually get it to the brain, and then the brain's going to die. On the flip side, you eat that apple, the amount of readily available what? Glucose. That's why if you notice, a lot of type 1 diabetics, do you understand, they actually have glucose pills, which are just available glucose. They're just available glucose. Think about that. So don't tell me glucose is bad. Don't tell me sugar is bad. It's not. It's essential. It's needed. It's just that what they should say is slower available, fast available. It's not good or bad. Please, there are no such things as good or bad carbs. That makes no sense. Clinically, nothing. So therefore, that's why people say, well, doc, I'm just going to, not eat this and not eat this. You know something that's really funny? I watched what's that freaked out, everybody's freaking out about this movie. It's the one about the vegans and athletes. What's it called? What? Game Changer. And I watch Joe Rogan, I watch people on there, and I watch the debates that way, and I'm sitting there going, let me get on there. Okay? Because you know why? Because you have the athletes of this, and you have the people of this. I'm like, you guys are taking it out of context. Let me ask you a question. Now remember, Jason that you saw came up here. Jason was a championship tennis player and coach, besides being an awesome videographer. If you haven't seen the video that our media team and Jason headed up with Kim, oh my goodness, you have to see it. Please go back and watch it. What a talent he has. But as a talented athlete, because you actually trained national champion people and collegiate and stuff like that, and I ask you high school, right?
Yep, all in.
So I want you to think about this. If Jason's advice was nutritionally for his high-level athletes, if they didn't have available glucoses for them, they actually would become hypoglycemic and their performance for their muscles and everything would go down. That's why some of the fallacies, though, this is kind of a fallacy, is the fact that if you don't carb load before an event, you'll run out of energy. Well, that's not a smart way of doing it, but I get what they're saying. So in Game Changers, they're like, high-level athletes and going vegan and stuff like that. Well, once again, they're not taken out of context, because is the veganism based on fruits? Is it based on vegetables? Is it based on starches? Is it based on cellulose? And then what happens is you have a bunch of meat people, you have a bunch of vegetarians fighting with each other. And I'm looking at them going, I would like to have a conversation with both of you guys. Because you know why? Because if you look at the chemical structure of all of it, there's certain things that are needed if you're a high-level athlete. That's the question should be asking. What does a high-level athlete need? And if I'm a high-level athlete, there's certain amount of proteins, carbohydrates, and fats that a person needs. And what is the most available thing for them to hit high performance? Because if he has a tennis champion, and then you have a huge weightlifter, there's a dramatic difference in demand for not only carbohydrates, but for every food source. So as I watch the debates, and as I watch people fighting about this, and I watch people get downright nasty on some of these things. I'm like, really? This is what we come out to? That we're so fighting if we should eat an egg or should we eat hemp? Should we have a salad over this? Actually, you know what's really funny? I'm going to throw something in there that they both need to chew on. If once again, if Jason had two top-level tennis athletes, are you telling me that they're biochemically the same and they need exactly the same thing? Man, then you don't understand biochemistry. You don't understand physiology. And do you think, I know it sounds funny, do you think that your diet is the only thing that is a game changer? I'll prove to you, if it's a female athlete, if you have mental stress and bad hormones, guess what happens? You could eat perfectly, and you're still not going to be a game changer. Do you see? You'll be a very unhealthy athlete. And that's why athletes today, so they're debating about the wrong things. If the question that they should do is this on that and stop the whole debate, and I watch it on Joe Rogan, then I'm sitting there going, not one of them either asked what an individual athlete needs, and have they been tested to find out what they need? Hasn't. So Joe Rogan, if you're listening, bring me on there. I'll give you a different perspective that you will never hear. And don't get me wrong, there was points that Chris Kresser, and there's points the guy who made the movie, that they were both right. And there were some huge points that they were both actually wrong. And that's what they're fighting about. Well, why don't we do this? Instead of you guys fighting, why don't you sit down and actually look at an individual athlete and figure out what they need instead of saying, meat is bad and vegetables are good. See, this is the debate. This is the debate. I can show you people that, number one, and I literally was on the phone with this young lady from Michigan. Not a joke. And you guys know how much I love organ meats. For me, organ meats can dramatically change my life. Okay? And there's people like me out there like crazy. But not everybody is. Not everybody is. There's a young lady in Michigan I was speaking to that, guess what? I can't have her right now anything that's not a vegetable, that's not some saccharide. Do you understand? She can handle some fats and she can handle some saccharides, some carbohydrates. But man, if she gets more of the high protein based meats, she can't handle it right now. You know, that's a game changer. Understanding the individuality of each person and their needs. And here's what happens. If you're at a high level athlete, stressing out your body, and you're a mom that's stressed out about everything, you know what I'm saying? There's different demands. And this is what I want people to understand about it. Okay? So watch. High fiber, low fiber. That's not true. That's not true. Actually, there's a lot of fiber in there. Just different. Here, watch this. Does anybody really know the difference between why people think brown rice is actually better than white rice? It's actually processing. That's all it is. This big fallacy. I mean, if you look at organic white rice that you didn't process, that has some fiber in there, actually, once again, processed white rice just makes you absorb and bioavailable of glucose much quicker than brown rice. But there's some people that you know out there that their body can't even tolerate insoluble fiber. Okay, so I want you to understand that. See, that's where I have to tell you that when I teach you guys stuff, when I teach the practitioners, when I teach our doctors, when I actually lecture all over the world, I want people to really get this concept that I'm going to put up some things to understand these different kinds of foods and what is actually in general more bioavailable and what are not. But you got to remember this. You have to remember this. Each one of you guys are an individual. Each one of you guys go through different changes. Let me give you an example. I was talking to this medical doctor who his wife was sick. And he called me up and he said, "Doc, I need your help, but can you do me a favor? Can you please keep it quiet? Because as far as what he felt that he was not a success and wasn't as good a doctor because he couldn't help his wife." And I looked at him, I said, well, I talked on my phone, I looked and I said, "Listen, that doesn't mean you're not a success. You just have a different perspective than I do." And the perspective was this. His wife had a major thyroid problem, and she was on Synthroid for a long period of time, and then she started to react to it. And so then he actually started to move a little bit more towards an integrative, more of a natural approach, and moved her to Armor. But he noticed that his wife still suffered from thyroid issues. They weren't as bad now. She had better days, but she couldn't understand. And I said this to him. I said, "Doc, let me ask you a question. You know your wife better than anybody. Is your wife's day the same every day?" And I think at first he thought I was being kind of like, disrespectful in a way, because like, I don't understand your question. He kind of said it that way. I said, "Let me ask you a different way. Is your wife's physical and mental demands on her body the same every day?" Well, then he perked up and said, No. I said, "Does your wife have sometimes days that are not stressful and sometimes days that are really stressful? Does she actually exercise sometimes and not exercise?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, let me ask you a question about that more natural medication that you give him, Armor," which I'm a fan of, especially if you've had thyroid removed. I said, "Well, let me ask you a question. The amount of thyroid hormone that she needs per day, is that always the same then?" And the phone got silent for a second. And he said this, and it'll never leave my brain. He goes, "You just destroyed everything I've known my whole career." Here, think about this. Let's say you're eating too much fructose, okay, which we're going to get to, and your triglycerides are going up, and they have you on a cholesterol medication that statistically will lower your overall cholesterol and triglycerides. What happens if you eat more fruit one day than less? Actually, statistically, if you're the doctor, you should say, if you have more fructose, what's going to raise your triglycerides, you need to take more statin drugs. Does that ever happen? See, that's the point that what happens is this. When they start talking about fiber, no fiber, calories, and actually no trans fats and full of trans fats, these things don't make any sense. They're not equating it to real life. They're generalizing it to everybody, but then they get this wrong in the first place. Watch this. Here, there's probably one thing here that I totally agree on, except for one. Digest slowly, digest fast. Guess what? Some polysaccharides do break down extremely easy. Extremely easy. Do you know that polysaccharides can get so tightly bound together, that humans can't even digest them? What do I mean? So if you start to bind glucose together, they form other things. There's one thing that is formed by cellulose and long-chain polysaccharides. You know what it's called? It's called wood. It's called wood. Wood is a carbohydrate. It's funny because there's certain parts of wood that we can digest, like xylitol, which is a birch bark, okay, and break down a little bit that way. But you know something? There's actually only 2 known creatures that actually have an enzyme to break down that kind of polysaccharide. Does anybody know what a guess is? I know when I say it, everybody's gonna be like, I know what that is. There's only one actually organism, well, there's 2, but there's only one that they really know of that has the enzyme to separate the bonds of those tightly huge polysaccharides. It's called termites. See, here's what happens. Do you know what's really funny? There's certain bugs out there that can break down these polysaccharides that we can't. And you know what we're meant to do? It's going to sound funny. Eat the bug. Because the bug actually does what? We're the only culture across this world that doesn't eat bugs. That's why people said, Doc, I can't believe that there's crickets now that you can buy in protein bars and stuff like that. Why don't you believe it? They have certain enzymes in their digestive tract that help them break down things. That's why it's like this. I just have to make fun of it because it's actually really, really, really misleading. Doc, have you ever seen a silverback gorilla, which is one of the strongest mammals on the planet, eat a meat? Okay. Sorry, evolution people. We don't come from monkeys. And actually, the digestive tract of a silverback gorilla is dramatically different. And do you understand that a silverback gorilla, over a 24-hour period, eats 16 to 20 hours a day? So if you want to be like a silverback gorilla, you have to have different intestinal tract. Their intestinal tract is different in size. Their large intestine is much larger than ours, much longer. Their small intestine is shorter than ours. That means they're more available to break down those polysaccharides so they can eat foliage, they can eat a ton of carbohydrates and break that down and actually combine it with and create muscle tissue like crazy with the proteins. We can't do that. We can't. So that comparison to say that silverback gorilla has never eaten anything but a vegetable and equate that to humans is actually falsely misleading. Falsely misleading. And they're leading people down the wrong path, and all of a sudden somebody goes and all they do is start eating vegetables and they drop off in their health. Yeah, on the flip side, there are people that actually have a predominantly, and if not all, vegetable-based diet. And guess what? And if they understand this, they can actually be a very healthy vegan. So I can't. My body doesn't. Man, my body actually doesn't do well with very bioavailable glucose. It doesn't. It doesn't at all. My wife, man, I think she could eat 5 donuts and actually drink high fructose corn syrup. I think she could take glucose pills and she'd still be this big around. I look at a donut and I'm already gaining weight. Do you see what I'm saying? But wait, Doc, it's organic donut. Good, I'll be organically fat. Do you see what I'm saying? Because I'm not my wife and she's not me. But I'm not you and you're not me. That's the cool thing about the individuality. That's the coolness about the Wellness Way approach. That's the coolness of just understanding biochemistry and physiology. So now, I want to talk a little about the factors that make it available. Number one, processing. That's why you've heard this. See, they say whole grain is more healthy than processed wheat. Well, what do they mean by that? When you process it, you pre-digest it. So let me give you another fallacy that what happens with people that are raw food people. So people say, Doc, raw food is better than actual cooked food. And all things put aside, let's say organic and nutrient stuff away, well, that's not really true. And in some cases it is. Let's say you have any digestive problem. All cooking does is separate the bonds and make it easier on your gut. It does. It really does. But guess what? You eat a raw tomato. There's certain lycopenes that you cannot break down if it's not cooked. See, so you can't generalize and think that it's going to work for everybody. So therefore, that's why a lot of people say, Doc, man, I ate a carrot, or I ate broccoli, or I ate cauliflower, or I ate salad, man, and I can't do it because it just tears up my system, aka my wife when I first met her. She couldn't eat a salad when I first met her because her digestive tract was so torn up. She had to cook her vegetables because she couldn't handle it. See, so taking that out of context is quite interesting. So that's why when they process things, they make glucose more readily available. Sugar cane, beet sugar, and then white sugar. If you process a beet, you can make something very bad because you make glucose so readily available. And when you eat a beet, it's not processed, and the glucose is actually slowed down by fiber and other things. See, what's fiber? See, people say, Doc, you got to get fiber per day. Well, there's two kinds. There's insoluble and soluble. But let's think about this. Why do I love chia seeds? Because, once again, it's actually a lot of glucose combined together that the bonds are very tough to break. And therefore, as I do what? As it passes through my GI tract, it releases nutrients, and actually the insoluble fiber grabs on things that shouldn't be there, and then the bowel says, you can't break down, I'm going to contract, and that's what assists the bowel movement in there. Psyllium husk, the same thing. Fiber is nothing more than long-chain polysaccharides. Fiber is nothing more than sugar. That's all it is. So when people say, sugar's bad, which one? Psyllium husk is sugar. Whoa, wait, it has fiber. What is fiber? Do you get my point? Fiber is nothing more than a bunch of sugars bound together, a bunch of glucose molecules bound together. That's hard to pull apart. That's it. I know it's so simple, but you understand this and what foods are. Now you have a better idea what to eat. Now, ripeness. It's kind of cool. Think about this. What do you think has more available sugar? A ripe banana or a green banana? Anybody want to take a guess in here? A ripened banana. The more something ripens, the more inside the organism itself. Do you understand that a food is a living organism? That banana, when it's green, is probably the best time to eat it. Has less available sugar, less available fructose, less available glucose, and therefore you can get that. That's why actually when you freeze your bananas, what do? They don't ripen anymore. They don't. See, that's why as a banana gets browner, what it does, it gets extremely sweet. Let me say that again. As it ripens, if you take a non-ripe banana, green, it's kind of sour because the sugars are not as readily available, and now your taste receptors cannot taste it as much. And then as it ripens, and why do you think you take bananas that are ripened and you make a sweet bread from it called banana bread? Do you see what I'm saying? Do you ever try to make banana bread out of a green banana? It's still banana, but you're like, that's the most sour bread I could ever taste. You gotta have some sugar in there. Do you see what I'm saying? That's why they do it that way. That's why they produce it. What else? Acid content. Oh my goodness. The more acidic the food is, not only is it less absorbable, the availability of sugars decreases. Now, as you guys know, Doc, you have obsessed about apple cider vinegar since the day that you actually learned about it. Yes, I have. Because the bioavailability of sugar in apple cider vinegar is very minimal to none. And the acidity itself that it creates in the stomach and setting the body up for absorption is dramatic. So the more acidic a food is, the less sugar they have. No, doc, no. Because you know why? Cancer grows in an acidic medium. That's not true. It's not true at all. This whole concept of eating basic foods, your most basic foods are also more sugar available, more glucose available. That's why I get so frustrated when I hear people throw out catchphrases that you got to eat a more basic diet. I don't understand physiologically where they get that from. I look at the biochemistry and physiology and all the anatomy going, where? How did they come with that conclusion? What they do is they take it out of context. Let me give you an example. In the 80s, this came out. You guys all know this if you are an 80s child and stuff. Well, even though it's more 70s, but 80s. Here's what happens. An aspirin a day is good for what, guys? The heart. An aspirin a day is good for the heart. And cardiologists studied the heart, and it thinned the blood, and actually it beat it easier, and we could tell that it was probably going to live longer. Because you know why? Aspirin doesn't have any negative side effect on the heart. So all the American Heart Association and all the doctors, they jumped on board because cardiologists said. Yeah, but you know what a cardiologist doesn't know? But you know what happens if you take an aspirin a day and you bump into something? What happens? You bruise. You bruise because, yes, very known negative side effect to the heart. But it thins all of your blood vessels. And then the rate of stroke that wasn't even in the top 10 killer is now, to this day, one of the major killers across the world because of one false statement that an aspirin a day is good for the heart. These are the fallacies that they're putting out there that are destroying people's lives. Don't fall into those catchphrases of you got to eat a basic diet. I don't understand where they get that. You got to reduce your stomach acid. I don't understand why they do it. You actually reduce your stomach acid, the rate of diabetes goes up. That's why Prilosec and all of the stomach acid stopping medications causes blood sugar problems. Now you get the connection. Now, fat content, we covered that last week. Guess what happens? Let me show you something. Do you know what the difference is? Do you understand that there is sugar in here and there's sugar in there? This roughly has about a gram. This has maybe a couple grams of sugar. See, people always say, Doc, what's your favorite fruit? Well, it's actually an avocado. An avocado is not a vegetable. An avocado is a fruit. But let's say this. In general, what people know as fruit, what's your favorite fruit? Raspberries. Does anybody ever ask me why? Because it's the lowest actually content of bioavailable sugar and fructose of all berries. That's why. Doc, why do you like raspberries? Because I know my body doesn't do well with sugar. I know the glucose gets in there so fast and does everything. Well, this has the lowest availability and actually absorption. But guess what? These are very similar. Why does this barely at all, if lucky, change your blood sugar, and this still can? Fat content. The amount of fatty acids with the sugar actually makes it less absorbable, makes it less available. So therefore, that's why people are like, avocados are good for you. It has no sugar. Yes, it does. It's just the availability goes down. So now, let me give you an idea. Let's start going through some of these available sugars, and I put out some charts. And if you want these charts, don't worry. Our amazing graphics team is putting these in, and I'm going to post these. I'm going to post these, and you can get a copy of them once our graphic team is done with them. I'm going to post and show you what ones are kind of low and not available, and ones that are kind of high. Let me give you an example. So let's take vegetables in general. Well, guess what? Celery is very low. Potatoes are kind of high. So are beets. They're kind of medium. Low ones, once again, onions. So therefore, they all have sugar in. Let me say it again. I love this. Every food on the planet has sugar, It has carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. They all do. They're just at different concentrations. So the available stuff is really low in these, and as you move here, it's higher. Now let's look at fruits. Oh, before I do that, I threw a little surprise in for you guys. It even surprised me. Okay? A potato. Guess what happens? A potato. Do you understand a potato has a certain high concentration of available sugar? You want to make it even more available? Create a baked potato. Does anybody know why they started to put dairy on potatoes? Because in history, when they were eating too many potatoes, glucose levels came up, so they threw a fat on it, they threw a dairy on it to slow its absorption down. And to stop causing people to spike their blood sugar. That's why fat was actually added to potatoes. And then they added some other spices that actually slowed the absorption of sugar down. Now, watch this, guys. Here's the funny part about potatoes. Actually, the funny part is this. Here, there's more sugar. Here, there's more sugar. If you let this cool down, guess what happens? The amount of sugars actually reduce dramatically, and it changes more into a sugar that's more like a fiber, and it's one of the greatest things for your GI tract. It's why potato salad is what should be eaten. Nobody should really eat a mashed potato. Does anybody know my mental addiction for 45 years was? Potatoes. This is what made me gain weight. Potatoes. This is what made me actually be embarrassed sometimes to get on camera. Potatoes. This is what caused me to be insecure sometimes. Potatoes. I wake up in the middle of the night and have nightmares and say, potatoes. Okay? This is my real life. I've always been vulnerable and open with you. But the idea is this, because here's what happens. I just love, and we make them organically, I just love fries. I love baked potatoes. I love mashed potatoes. And I used to try to compensate my mental craving by saying they're organic. I'm going to put some butter on it, good organic butter. I'm going to put all the things on there and reduce absorption. But man, when it hit my bloodstream, hit my liver, they're like, ugh. I was making myself organic potato sick. Okay? I know it sounds funny, but you say, Doc, but your wife ate a ton of potatoes with you. And she didn't have a problem because she's not me. Dr. Jason and Dr. Greg, they ate potatoes, didn't hurt them. They're not me. Because there's things that affect both Christy, Dr. Jason, and Dr. Greg, and Dr. Mitch, and Nicole. Actually, Nicole's more like me. Nicole has a liver that doesn't like this either. Okay? And so therefore, guess what? These are the things, for example, that we're figuring out an individualized food plan for you, for me, for you is so key. Okay? Now, so that's why you let it cool, it actually becomes healthier. Now watch this. I got a question for you guys. What's way over there? Well, as those potatoes rot, guess what happens? It's even more healthy for you. Because you know what happens? You see what sprouts from there? A sprouted potato will actually create a whole nother green plant. And the chemical composition of those sugars become disaccharides, polysaccharides, fiber, cellulose into a new plant. So that's why sprouted grains are actually known to be healthier, because they do have less available sugar. But then when they process grains, see why grains have gotten such a bad rap? It's because even the best organic grains still have to process a lot to get them into your body. See what I'm saying? Nobody walks out to a wheat field and just eats the wheat. They have to even crush it and process it. It's just like corn. Corn, people say, Doc, corn's been our generation for thousands of years. Well, not really. The corn has changed. Most of it's GMO, but the people took cornmeal and they ground it down. They processed it by hand. Now they process it so finely, it makes it so available for us, it's absolutely crazy. But do not throw out a sprouted potato. It's actually a healthier version. And actually, believe it or not, it actually moves backwards. This is a whole nother deep level of nutrition, but you can actually make foods move backwards if you know what to do with them. if you even know how to food combine. Okay? So now, well, what about fruits, Doc? Well, look at this. There's the low, there's a very low, medium, and there's no high. Guess what happens? Really, fruits, once again, because fruits have more fructose. That's why they don't have a lot of available glucose. Now, there are some that have more glucose, but guess what happens? From a glucose standpoint, there's none that are high, because you know why? It's a ratio between fructose. That's what's fruit sugar, okay? But look at this. Avocados, olives, cucumbers. Yes, those are fruits. Olives, avocados, and cucumbers. Now watch this. What does olives and avocados have that make all simple sugars actually absorb slowly? Fats. See, do you think it's coincidence that our body is made up of majority fats? Do you think it's coincidence that we need high contents of fat? Do you think it's coincidence? No, because even if we eat them, it changes the absorption of how glucose gets in our system. Now, what else? Here we go. Seafood. Look where seafood ranks. Very low. Look where meats rank. Very low. Look where dairy ranks. Higher. Doc, I have no idea why you let us have beef, but during the no sugar January, you wouldn't let us have dairy. Well, it's a higher content of sugar, including lactose. So I didn't want you guys to have that during time. We're trying to reduce the bioavailable sugars. Doc, why wouldn't you let us have fruits during the thing? Bioavailable sugars and mainly fructose. See, there's a reason. There's always a reason why I choose something that way. So remember, these are the things that, guess what? That we need to know. These are the things that when we eat. So if you're going through and noticing things aren't changing, there might be something that your body is not handling well. All right? Now, dairy. Now what else? Look at this. Spices. Guess what? Spices and herbs, they're all very low. Wait, spices and herbs. Turmeric. Is that an herb? Spice? Yes. See, there's great spices and herbs that are fantastic that don't affect your blood sugar. But there's high nutrients in them that they have very low available sugars. Gotta understand, the herbs I give out, yes, there's phytochemicals, but they're just sugars. Your immune system runs off of them. Your immune system runs off of certain polysaccharide sugars, even though they don't like to call them sugars, they're still sugars that you need. So once again, people say sugars are bad. Which ones? None of them. Now, Doc, you say you talk about fruit. What about fructose itself? Well, I didn't realize a statement that I made actually was going to affect people so much. So I want to talk about this for a couple minutes before we end. Fructose itself, once again, it's different than glucose. See, the fallacy and the misleading part that food companies and drug companies should be held accountable for, but they're not because of politicians. But here's what happens. People said, Doc, well, we went from sugar to high fructose corn syrup because it didn't spike the blood sugar. Well, but what they found out is because fructose, a fruit sugar, actually doesn't spike your blood sugar like glucose does, because blood sugar is based on glucose, not fructose. But then what happens is this. It's actually converted several times in the liver to different things. And here's the badness they found in it. Because people are eating so much fructose, and believe it or not, they weren't getting it mainly from fruit. They were getting it from high fructose corn syrup additives. Please do not eat that. Well, your body actually can handle moderation. No, it cannot. Stop that ridiculous saying. There's no such thing as moderation. Your liver does not know moderate high fructose corn syrup. It knows, is it there or not? Is it good or is it bad? And if I'm going to introduce some fructose in my system, it's going to be in the form of what? Fruit. Okay, not processed high fructose corn syrup. But guess what? It takes fructose and converts into glucose. Yes, even our simple sugars convert it. Gluconeogenesis. It's a liver process. So that's why I say, Doc, fruit sugars are better than regular sugars. I'm like, where do you get that from? If you're going to need energy, you're going to want to add something with glucose in your system. If you add fructose, okay, guess what happens? It has to convert to glucose. So there's one extra step to make it energy available. All right? Now, you say, Doc, but where is fructose the most valuable? Now, it's going to sound funny. Fructose is not the most valuable to humans. Let me say this again. Fructose is not the most valuable to humans. It's most valuable to the bacteria in humans. Let me say that again. It's the most valuable to the bacteria in humans. It's why if you have a yeast overgrowth, you even get rid of your fruit. Because your bacteria go, ooh, fructose. I can use that. Let's get down. We can create some party. We'll get along. You know what I'm saying? They love it. No, but Doc, I eat organic raspberries. Well, guess what? If you actually have, and you already have too much glucose, and now you have fatty liver disease. And fatty liver disease is, for example, as your liver is starting to scar and hold so much sugar because it can't put in the bloodstream because too much will cause you to go in hyperglycemic coma. It actually starts depositing everywhere. And then your liver conversion, your liver pathways are dramatically changed. Glycogen. Glycogen, for example, is just a combination of glucose. See, it's a stored. That's why when you eat glucose, it puts the liver right away and stores as glycogen. Your body cannot store glucose. It has to make larger polysaccharides. Lactate. Oh, here we go. Because once it actually converts to lactate, it converts to lactic acid, which causes a lot of muscle soreness and aches and burning. That's why fructose, organic fruit, high fructose corn syrup, it doesn't matter. There's a certain amount of glucose. Obviously, high fructose corn syrup has more of it. And therefore, even fruit can cause somebody to build up lactic acid and end up with lactic acidosis and be very bad for somebody. Okay? Triglycerides, there it is. This is the part I didn't realize was going to go viral last week. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. Yes, by reducing your glucose, how does reducing your glucose affect your triglycerides? Well, if I can get rid of the fructose, it can convert to glucose and I can use it. So if I drop all sugars, including fruit sugars, my triglycerides drop and then your cholesterol levels drop. Now, if you think about this, fructose though, a bunch of it, a large percent of it, I think in totality, guess what happens? It's converted right away to triglycerides. So let me say this again. I will say this very clearly so this is not confusion. If you have any triglycerides that are too high, guess what happens? You need to get rid of all fructose out of your system, all. And within 3 months, you will go back to get your blood work done. And actually, they will start to drop. And then the cool thing is this, as they start to drop, the overall cholesterol levels, because cholesterol is nothing more than LDL, HDL, and 1/5 your triglycerides. And you'll start to see that total number drop. But here's what happens. So somebody tells me they're eating a good diet, but they can't get their cholesterol under control, but they're eating organic fruit every day. You're not going to get your cholesterol under control, because that's why what you're doing is you're consuming things to produce it. And that's mainly by fructose. Now, well, Doc, is there different levels of fructose in foods? Of course there is. Look at, that's why I love raspberries, guys. They're right at the bottom. The lowest fructose is actually an apricot, but I think apricots suck. I do. I don't like them, okay? So I want to actually eat more of a raspberry. But guess what? You're going to notice that berries, that's why I say, Doc, if you tell a person if they're going to eat a fruit, what should they eat? Berries. Berries are probably the best thing in general, okay? Strawberries, raspberries, black. So my two favorite fruits are actually this. Now, what I mean by that is the general known fruits, because avocado is a fruit. Okay, so is a cucumber, and I love cucumbers. But my favorite berries go raspberries and blackberries. Does anybody know why? Because they're the lowest fructose content of all fruits. Now, there's high ones, and these are good stuff. Man, look at there. Apples. Man, apples have a ton of fructose. Ton. That's why when they actually showed the picture of an apple and a donut, I'm like, man, be careful. You're misleading people. An apple can cause your triglycerides. An apple a day brings your doctor closer to you, not away. It does. Well, Doc, it's a Granny Smith. Well, then blame Granny for your high triglycerides. Sometimes I just come up with stuff right off the top of my head. Okay? But that's what happens. Now watch, Granny Smith is going to contact me. I did that one time. I spoke up at my hometown one time, and it's really funny. I spoke at my hometown, and I said, because I tell people, 90% of all things in grocery stores are bad. They are. And I wasn't picking on any grocery store. The owner of the grocery store, the owner's daughter, grocery store, sent me a nasty message saying, I can't believe you're tearing on us. I wasn't tearing on you. 90% of stuff in your grocery store is not good for individuals. And just because you didn't like what I have to say, guess what? I promise you, trust me, if I have not offended you yet, please contact me personally, because I'm an equal opportunity offender. I will actually find something to offend you, I promise. So please contact me, okay? But I want to offend people because I want them to stimulate their thought to go, this is what needs to happen. Sick people dominate this world right now. The biggest debate in politics today is what? Healthcare. Who's going to pay for it? Because the rate of sickness, the rate of costs, everything are dramatically going up. I'm offended. I'm offended. I'm offended that people are suffering and nobody's sticking up and saying anything about it because they're worried about who they're offending and who they can change their life. That's not me. I will make employees mad. I'll make people mad. I'll make people quit. It's their problem, not mine. Because I will continue to do what needs to be right to give people this information regardless if it offends somebody. That's what we need to do as individuals. So I want you to think about this. This is misleading when they put the apple up there. Now, most fruits and vegetables are about 60 to 40% fructose to glucose. So that's why they're based on the ratios. But here's one thing, and you're going to love this. What is the highest fructose-based food in the world? Does anybody know? Anybody have an idea? The Latinos absolutely hate that I say this. Okay? Now the Latinos are going to be mad at me. Okay? But let me explain. The Latinos are going to hate this. And statistically, I'm going to blow your mind away right here. The number one highest fructose-based food in the world is agave. Agave is not a healthy sweetener. If you have any kind of liver problem and you add agave, you will just tear your system apart. No, doc, it's organic, perfect agave. It doesn't matter. Because if you have fatty liver, you'll create more of it. Now you say, well, doc, why would Latinos be mad at you? Does anybody know the number one food source made from agave? Tequila. And statistically, guess who has the highest rate of fatty liver disease in the world? Japanese and Latinos. Why the Japanese? Because they use an alcohol that's made with processed rice, which is just higher sugar. You know what I'm saying? Sake it to me has caused them a lot of fatty liver. If you guys can't hear, the media team just went away. Come on now, if you don't know, I'm a huge Austin Powers fan. It's like, suck it to me, baby. Okay? But what happens is this. It's actually done in creating fatty liver, which leads to almost every disease on the planet, including type 2 diabetes, type 1, heart disease, cancers, everything. So when people tell me that agave is a great sweetener to add in your stuff, I'm like, to who? To who? Maybe a child can tolerate because they haven't built up a bunch of liver problems yet. Because guess what happens? But the amount of tequila drank, it's the number one actually alcohol drink in Mexico. It's not, statistically it's well known. It's actually grown there quite easily. But see, now what happens is, I'd say, doc, are you picking on a nationality? No, I'm trying to get the nationalities to understand that when you go in there and your triglycerides are so high and you wonder why, and you go, oh my goodness. Well, it's because if you look at it, you're going to cause a lot of issues that way. So now, you know me, I always like to give some action steps. Increase your fat content, guys. Increase your healthy fat. You need to. And you need to figure out either yourself or with a Wellness Way doctor that's an expert on what your body needs. On what your body needs. Second of all, add apple cider vinegar before you eat. Eat lower amounts of fructose. Please do that for me. Eat lower amounts of fructose. Avoid agave. I'm sorry. I just can't have people do it right now because the majority of people have some form of non-alcoholic fatty liver. They do. And that's why I can honestly tell you, let me explain this to you. I can honestly tell you, I became known for hormones all over the world by saying two things. Number one, Estrogen is not a hormone, it's a bunch of them. And second of all, those estrogens convert in the liver in those pathways. And if you have any kind of congestion in that liver, it destroys your hormones, ladies. It destroys it. If you have fatty liver, it destroys it. You cannot have proper hormone balance. And I don't care if you go to integrative doctor and they give you bioidenticals, I don't care what you do. They're not doing what's right. Doesn't work that way. Eat less things with labels. During the No Sugar Challenge, our wonderful nurse practitioner, Nicole, said, stop looking at ingredients and just start eating stuff that doesn't have ingredients. Do you understand? Eat more whole-based foods. An avocado, I don't have to look at the ingredient list. There's an avocado. Do you understand? Those are the things you can do. Now, we're going to cover this big time next week. We talked about insulin, but get your hemoglobin A1C. Because your hemoglobin A1C is going to tell me how much you've been getting rid of available glucose over the course of 3 months, roughly, if not a little bit longer. If that level is high, it's starting to be a bad day. It's actually one of the biggest determiners if you have type 2 diabetes or not. So now, I'm going to ask you this question again that I started off last week with. Is sugar bad for you? Is sugar bad for you? If anybody would say yes, they have no concept of biochemistry and physiology and anatomy. Your tissues are made of sugar. Your tissues are made of proteins. Your tissues are made of fats. Your actually, number one fuel is glucose. Fiber is nothing more than long-chain sugars. Actually, wood is a sugar. Guess what? Plants are full of sugar. Greens are full of sugar. Broccoli is full of sugar. So the concept, like saying, estrogen is bad. So now, sharing all these concepts for years, I've been able to share this with the world, and now we have you guys really loved what I had to say, but also doctors from here, now across seas, and even more. Because one thing that an 80-year-old guy walked up to me after I did the inflammation talk on Thursday, if you didn't see the pictures, it was pretty awesome. Hundreds of people showed up. And he came down, and he said, Doc, there's one thing that I love watching your videos. He goes, you make so much sense. Because you know why it makes sense? Because I'm trying to break this down so you can do it to have a better life. What am I trying to sell you? I'm not. I'm trying to lead you to a better way of life. But I can't do it myself. There's doctors all around this country that do this on a regular basis. And I want you guys to meet somebody that's been here training for the last couple days. And I'm going to step aside once I introduce her. So Dr. Beth Cook, you can come up here. I'm going to step aside, and I want her to tell you about herself. So Dr. Beth, welcome. Everybody, Dr. Beth, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Like Dr. Patrick said, I am Dr. Beth Cook. I practice in Houston, Texas, and I've been with the Wellness Way for about 3 years, I think. 3 years, but I don't know what else to tell you about me except that I love the Wellness Way. But I think that what Dr. Patrick is doing is so important because there's just such bad misinformation out there, and I think that's why we're so sick, right? I mean, we have been getting bad advice. I see patients every week that they come and tell me things, and I'm like, oh my gosh, let's erase all of what you know. So all the thinking that you've had up until now is most likely why you're sick. That's why these videos are so important, because we have to change the way that we think. You cannot get better. You cannot get healthy. You cannot do what your body needs, right? We're all different. We all have different needs. We all have different requirements. You can't do that with the same thinking that you have right now. So watch these videos, share these videos. We all love to educate. It's free. You don't have to pay anything. Like Dr. Patrick said, we're not trying to sell you anything. We're simply trying to change how you think so that you can get healthy on your own. I have an Instagram, I have a Facebook, we all do. My Instagram is Dr. Beth Cook. I love to just educate on the daily basis, and you know, once you start learning, you're gonna realize, okay, they're onto something here, and then reach out to us and we can help you get what your body needs. There's no way you're gonna know unless you get tested, unless you start to really figure out what you need so that you can get healthy. So I've been here for the past couple of days learning and training, and I'm gonna go back to Houston a better doctor. I'm excited about that. So yeah. Thanks for having me here.
You betcha.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Beth.
Yeah, no problem.
Dr. Beth practices in the Houston area. What area of Houston?
I'm like in the northwest part of Houston, like in Cypress.
Yes, yes, we have several clinics in Houston, and she is there. So thank you so much, Doctor.
Yeah, thanks.
You guys have heard me say this. I went the wrong way. Countless and repetitive. I've told everybody I haven't changed much what I've said in 20 years, and I'm gonna say this again. There's nothing that can be done without other great people. And other great people are grown, they're not born. This idea of born leadership makes no sense. Because you know why? When my kids were young, and Beth actually has 4 children. She has a wonderful husband, Dave, and guess what? 4 awesome kids. And she has an 11-month-old. And Dr. Beth, let me ask you a question. Do you have to teach your child to be sassy? No. No, you do not. Your kids are born a pain in the hinder, okay? And you have to train them up. My daughter Faith is behind here at 16 and a half years old. And guess what happens? When she was little, I mean, she may be close to perfect right now and stuff, but as she smiles. But guess what happens? When she was young, you had to train them up. You know what the sad part is this? And the reason why I bring that up is people are trained wrong today. It's why we're so sick. It's why Dr. Beth was here training for 2.5 days. And guess what happens? It starts with a different way of thinking. I got her to think differently when it came to business. I got her to think differently a little bit more when it came to practice, because she's already clinically up to date on that pretty well. And she applies all that stuff daily to her practice to people all over the world. And that's evident of every doctor we have. So the whole key to everything, I don't care if I'm training a doc, I don't care if I'm training you, just remember, you need to stop listening. You need to start learning so you think differently. Train, train, train. But here's what happens. A lot of people don't know this information. So please do me a favor. I ask you from the bottom of my heart, could you please share? Please share what we're doing. I'm excited about it. Next week, I'm going to go into sweeteners, get rid of some of the major myths like I did today of some of this stuff, and what some of the best sweeteners are to use. I kind of covered agave a little bit, but Doc, what are your favorite sweeteners and why? That's the big thing. You're getting an idea why raspberries were my favorite. You're getting an idea why avocados are some of my favorite. You're getting an idea because now you can see the physiology and biochemistry behind it. So now you're starting to learn. So now guess what? You're thinking differently. And I got a question for you. How many of you guys going forward are gonna drink or eat something with agave? See, even my media team just did this. Because now that they think differently, they're gonna act differently. And we need to start acting differently to have better health. Guys, thank you so much for always watching me. My media team just told me, and now I know why the excitement was before, that we did over 1,000 people today live. It almost wants to make me cry because I thank you for that. It can't happen without you, and it definitely can't happen without you. God bless all you guys. I love you guys. Have a beautiful day. Hey, thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a single video or live stream. Also, share this video with a friend. Once again, thank you for watching.